We'll give Michael just a minute to dial in, and we are back in Bristol, Virginia, and we had a good trip, and I'm not sure if Peter's going to be able to call in or not, but we'll wait and hear from him, and I will be getting things finally updated back on the website now that I'm back at my main computer, and we thank you for holding the space for us as we traveled. So, if you have any questions, press 1, and that puts a hand up, and we know that you want to talk to us. And there is a hand up, and I'm not sure if it's left over from Dr. Tim or not, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the microphone for area code 770. You are on the air. Who do we have?
Hi, Jeannie. It's Michael.
Hi. How are you doing?
Michael Tatey. How are you?
Good. About to get back into the swing of things, and we do have Aria today, so it's been a busy morning. I had another chiropractor appointment this morning, and doing much better, and I'm thankful.
Oh, man, that is wonderful. Glad things are coming along with your arm or shoulder. Is that right?
Yes. He said we're going to, which I went like 8-9 days without a treatment while we were gone, and he was pleased with the progress and that I hadn't gone backwards, and so he said we would go once this week, once next week, and then we might even drop back to just every other week. So that's a good thing.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Sounding like real good progress.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And thanks for calling in. Michael will be with us here in just a second. And
okay. How's the road noise right now? Is it manageable?
It's okay. Yeah,
okay.
like I said, when you're talking, you can't hear any of it. When you're not talking, you can hear a little bit. But if it gets too loud, I'll put you on mute and then unmute you later. But
okay.
We can hear you loud and clear.
I'm on a different headset than I usually am, so
yeah.
We're running in and out of storms, and that could tend to be really noisy too. So we'll just work it through, and if it gets too bad, we'll cut out till next time, maybe.
Okay. Well, Michael's with us now, so yeah, it is fine. So Michael's with us.
Okay.
So Michael Tatey is on with us.
Hi, Michael.
Welcome, good sir. My mute button was hiding from me.
Well, we're glad to hear you, and here we are, almost ready to enter into Mississippi. Are you hearing me okay?
You're loud and clear. Safe travels.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I did listen to the show from yesterday, and quite an amazing story. If I'm recalling, it was was it Sam, a lady Sam, was it?
Yes.
That's so.
Yeah, a lady from Arkansas.
Amazing story. Wow. But may I ask you a couple questions? I think that came up on that show for me.
Right. Yeah, go for it.
What are punishing thoughts? I mean, I think I got my idea, but I'd like to, since it came up, I'm going to mute because we got a lot of road noise.
Yeah, my take would be punishing thoughts would be any thought linked to hostility toward self or another, toward God, toward a tree, toward anything. And one who enters into hostility, the first person they punish, of course, is themselves. You know, we always get the original; they get the carbon copy.
So negative thoughts toward other people, or turned inward.
Yeah, whatever direction they go. But specifically punishment thoughts, I would come from the category of hostility. based thoughts rather than just negative thoughts. We could say there are different categories of negative thoughts, and some of them are based in fear and some of them are based in hostility. The ones based in hostility I would put in the category of punishment.
Okay, and I'm grasping that easily toward other people. I get what it is to be hostile toward others. Been there, done that, unfortunately. How does that work toward oneself? How is one hostile toward oneself?
Well, I can't count how many times I've heard somebody say, "I'm so stupid. That was such a stupid thing for me to do." That's a hostile thought toward self. I always make mistakes. I mean, I've always known I've never been good enough. Those would all be hostile thoughts, punishing thoughts toward self.
Okay.
Withholding approval from self, withholding the experience of self as love would all tie into that dynamic, would be my take.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something?
Please do, sweetie. Yes, absolutely.
So one time I was doing a worksheet, and my punishment thought towards the person, the trigger, was that I was going to leave, and my punishment thought to myself was I was going to stay. So in other words, stay and take it, or, run away. So it's kind of both.
Okay. That's a little more clear in my mind. A lot of that I was on the right track in my comprehension, so that's great. And
the example that I usually use in the Why workshop when I do it, I do a worksheet on a woman named Sally, and her punishment thought was, her boss was, in her mind, abusive to her, so she was going to leave. It's the same thing as Jeannie just said. Leaving, she needed the job, it was punishing self, and the boss needed the worker, so it was punishing him.
Okay. All righty, and moving along, I just want to clarify some words I think I heard yesterday's show or the day before. It's about collapsing perception.
Yes, let me throw in one other thought. Let me throw in one other thought before we go on to perception. A very common punishment thought in the culture, and sadly, it comes out of churchianity, and that is, you're a sinner. Very common punishment thought. Belief about self, projection toward another. Now, recognizing in Aramaic the word sin is an archer term that means off the mark. Have I done things that are off the mark? Absolutely. So I have, quote unquote, in the Aramaic sense, sinned, and of course so have you, and so have we all. But that does not make us, that takes it into the punishment realm of you're a sinner. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. And growing up with that kind of drilled into us at the church, and even as I left different churches and went to others, it's still very prevalent. So really resonate with that. Thank you.
Michael, I hear you talking through the wall, but not the phone.
Excuse me, my mute button was pushed. I just finished writing a piece. I shared with you. No, we're here. I had shared with you when we talked, Michael, that I was working on a roadmap for the quantum still point. And I just finished writing a piece that ties in with this idea. That's what brought it to mind. And so I just want to read a few paragraphs from that. It starts out with a quote from Einstein, which you've heard me use before. On such things as matter, we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy, energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. That's out of the mouth of Albert Einstein. When you bypass the mind's perceptual tricks and become aware that the world, quote unquote, we live in is an energetic world, not a physical world, when you understand that forgiveness refers to an energetic undoing process, not letting others off the hook, a new paradigm emerges, one in which dynamics obscured for centuries by ignorance, mistranslation, misinterpretation, abuse, make sense and become real possibilities. In that new paradigm of truth, rather than the errant Greek guilt-inducing terror so many have been brainwashed and destroyed by, the word sin in Aramaic is beneficially understood as intended. It is an archery term that simply means off the mark, simply referring to an incoherent energy dynamic within one's own structure, an energy that divides oneself from itself. The saying, house divided against itself cannot stand, all of a sudden takes on a whole new meaning. Once one realizes sin describes an energy that destroys the integrity of the system it inhabits, one realizes sin is not something that you need to be forgiven for, but is a life-destroying energy that needs to be forgiven or removed. Forgiveness of sins is not about forgiveness of sin is about undoing that untoward energy and its effects. This is a particularly important principle to understand for those laboring under the greatest sin of all, quote unquote sin, generational fear. So denial of this internal force, and we're talking here now that this paragraph or this section, it proceeded with talking about Ruka, and we're looking to enlist the support of Ruka de Kudsha to assist in the unlifting, the undoing of the incoherent energy that's destroying us.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. What could you elaborate more on generational fear?
Sure. Well, recognizing, science has identified this thing they call epigenetics. There's a really excellent free video you can do a search for on YouTube called, let me get my brain there, give me just a second to catch up with that. Stress, Portrait of a Killer. And in that video, they show the generational effects not only of thinking, but of food and diet and how future generations, they've literally done research in countries where they really generational patterns of disease and starvation in particular. And they showed that starvation 2, 3, 4 generations ago changes the physiology of a person 4 generations down. And of course, a part of that process is our thinking, those energies that are off the mark. So a person going through starvation 4 generations ago literally changes the capacity of the person in this generation, in this research project, to process food and to survive. So when we recognize that we don't live, again, in a physical world, but in an energetic world, every energy we engage in is stored holographically, literally in every cell of our structure, including the sperm and the egg. So you to conceive a child, tomorrow that child would have in its structure every thought you've ever thought, every feeling you've ever felt, every energy you've ever engaged in. If those energetic patterns are based in hostility and or fear, then we become the inheritors of those generational patterns. The scriptures talk about it as And again, remembering the word sin is just an archery term, the sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations. And then a part of that particular passage that is often ignored after the comma, 3 and 4 generations, it says, yea, of those who hate me. And when you look at that passage, what you hear is the Creator giving instructions to humans. And the word hate there is not hate as in a love-hate relationship, but those who are separated from the active presence of love, the Creator. So when we have only what's in our genes and in our epigenetics, the generational patterns to turn to, because we are separated from our true created essence as love, the objective of the quantum still point, the objective of all this work is to return to a direct experience of who we are as human beings and allow the energy of that to filter through the whole energy system, clean it out, and bring healing. Most people are trying to work from the opposite direction. Or we're going to go out there and find something and bring it in here to heal. So here's the Creator saying, if you're not connected with me, if you're not connected with active love, i.e. those who hate me, then the only advisor you have for your behavior and your learning is going to be what your generations have learned. Now, if you've got generations that have functioned as love and function as human beings and, if stuff comes up, they understand forgiveness and remove the garbage, then you got a pretty good leg up. I haven't met too many people who came from that kind of a family system. And so, to me, the objective is ultimately to recognize my connection to Source, reestablish that connection, and turn to that mind for advice rather than my generational patterns of hostility and fear.
Amazing what science, beginning with my learning of Bruce Lipton some years ago, it is just absolutely amazing what is passed on to generation, and thanks for expounding on that. And it's just remarkable what is in our DNA. I know you've said it many times since I've known of you and your work, and it still astounds me to think about it. I don't recognize that title of that video, but I'll go back and listen and get that. I'd like to see that video.
Yeah, Stress, Portrait of a Killer. It's a guy named Sapolsky, who's a university professor that spent, a couple of decades when he was on vacation and did research projects. He would study baboons. And when you have the brain cells for how stress is created, and you watch that video, and that when you set a goal, you create stress. You've gone into that question next. When you set a goal, you create a stress in your mind, and the functioning purpose of the mind is to give you information with which to alleviate that stress, give you behaviors with which to alleviate that stress. If you don't have a connection to active present love, then you have to turn to what's in your genes. And Sapolsky goes through just a whole litany of evidence about these generational patterns. And again, to get back to and reconnect, whenever one of the basic errors of the human mind, as I see it, is we haven't been taught what it means to remain in our true essence as love, no matter what happens in the world. We make things out there more important than staying connected with our source. And when we do, we just get lost in the hostility and fear-based game. And the objective of this work is to restore us to, something happened that I don't like, and my physiology is still connected to love. I can turn my awareness to love, and I can see this event through compassion and love rather than through hostility and fear.
Makes the difference. For certain. No, I'm looking forward to that next reiteration of your writings on the still point, and I've listened on and off to the time you spent with Peter, and brought back memories of you inviting me as I was going to my mother's services, and I reflected to them. Say again, please.
Reminded you of the session we did on the quantum still point?
Yes, at your invite to visit there, and I reflected on that, and again, I thank you so much, you and Jeannie, for doing that with me, and you know, that just opened up so much for me, Michael. I mentioned before, it's hard for me to put it in words, but I realize I'm in a whole lot better space and place than I was in February this year, and prior to that. And through your encouragement, also talk to, you know, some other health practitioners out in Texas, and it's just come a long way. That truly opened a new door for me. I just want to thank you again. I want to mention that on the show.
That's awesome. Well, my offering, my take, what I'm really understanding now, having taken several people through the quantum still point process, is that, you know, the Creator gave us a perfect structure. Self-healing, self-repairing, awesome device to function through. Awesome instrument. And you could almost imagine the moment where the Creator, you know, having been in charge of all life, having, you know, run the whole game from day one, says, I think I've done a good job. Humans are the next level of my creation, and I'm going to give them something that I haven't given to anybody else. I'm going to give them the ability to choose and to originate something new. We don't know of any other creature that can originate something new. You know, the wolf who has a den on the side of the river, the wolf's intuition can tap in and know that the river's rising and get them up out of the way of the rushing water. But that's not a new behavior. That's just survival mode. We'll never see the wolf that says, you know, I really like this den. I put a lot of work in it, so I'm going to build a dam in front of it and leave my pups where they are. The wolf, there isn't a creature we know of that can originate. We can. And you could almost imagine the Creator giving us caution. You can originate whatever you want. Ask and you will receive. And there's no qualification on that. I won't change your asking. If you ask, you know, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you ask for the bad and the ugly, I'll bring you that as happily as I'll bring you what you call the good. You know, there's a powerful line in the scriptures that says, shall there be evil in the city and the Lord has not done it? There's only one functioning power in the universe, and that power gave us the ability to originate, choose something new. And my take is what science is now labeling epigenetics is the program that gets passed from generation to generation of all of the asking, including the unresolved issues of the generations, passed from one to another to another to another. Forgiveness is about going into that epigenetic program and removing whatever's there that is an incoherent energy for our human lives. And fortunately, the Creator gave us a marker. The Creator gave us an indicator, an alarm bell, or actually two of them, called hostility and fear, to warn us when we're going against our highest and best good. But we haven't read it as that. We've been brainwashed into, and you know, you've heard me say this before, the average person by the age of 4 in this culture is a card-carrying member of the One World Universal Religion of Blame. Very devout, very religious, in their finding somebody else to blame for everything that's going on in their lives. Hence, has lost the ability to change their own minds, to reach into their own epigenetics, to develop the skill and the ability to learn to recognize when there's an energy inside of us that doesn't belong, and instead of using it to create perceptions of others, instead of dissociating from it and building pictures of other people out of it, so that our perception, the constructs of our mind show us that, yes, you're right, the problem is outside of you. Of course, the person who says the problem is outside of them, if I remind them that they've been through it 87 different times with 42 different people, everybody goes, oh, damn, yeah, that's true. Well, but I see that it's them. Yeah, well, that's how we're tricked by the perceptual mind. You know, there's a great line in the Course in Miracles that says, perception is a skill made up by us to take the place of what the Creator gave us in creation. The objective of this work is to be restored to what the Creator gave us in creation, which means without the tool to collapse perception, most everybody's working trying to correct things in the perceptual world. And the example I use of that is that's like moving around deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah, it's a little better. I can hear the band better now that I've moved my chair up here. And yeah, I'm at the very top of the ship. My feet will be the last feet to hit that icy cold water, but the ship is going down. Every bit of work that's done within perception is the shifting the chairs on the Titanic. We need to go beyond that. And when I look at the genius that this man 2,000 years ago brought to us, that he knew exactly what caused perception and exactly how to collapse it so that the underlying dissociated content that needed to be cleaned out, that is the cause of all disease, suffering, and pain, how to access it and free ourselves from it, makes him, to me, the absolute master physician. And many people, many people acknowledge, they say the words master physician, but what they mean is, well, some kind of a miracle worker that's got powers that we don't have, and of course, we could never do it. Total contraindication to what he said. He said, the things I do, you can do, and greater. He was showing us how to do the work that needed to be done. And unfortunately, the Greeks got a hold of it, and because the basic Greek philosophy, if you look at the Greek gods, they abuse their own children, they rape their own mothers, they kill their own spouses, crazy stuff, and want to control everything and everybody. And that means that whole pantheon was built on and out of the One World Universal Religion of Blame. And when we're indoctrinated in that religion, then the mind shows us false pictures about how everybody else is responsible for what's going on inside of us. And then along comes the preacher that says, well, now, look, yes, of course, you're right, it is their fault, but you just be good about it, you forgive them. Which leaves the incoherent, disease-producing energy right there in the physiology of the person who is a member of that Church of Blame, and the beat goes on. More violence, more viciousness, more insanity, and only now the insanity is done in the name of God.
It is a real sobering thought about 4 years old and what you have just explained to us. And it really touches me because I'm of course going to see my grandchildren on this trip, and my next to youngest granddaughter is just turned 4 years old. So really going to be observing extra this time and seeing how that all unfolds. But
wait.
Yeah, it's really something. So back to collapsing perception.
You may, by the way,
yes,
as you're observing, get to see some of the unconscious dynamics that you use in raising your children being played out with your grandchildren? If you do, remember that's your work and your opportunity, and be careful about how you might point it out, because it's easy to play in those circumstances John the Baptist, which, if you remember correctly, John was the guy who, they called him the raving maniac in the desert. There's a reason for that.
Oh, yeah.
The desert is a code word for the unconscious, and each of us, when they said the forerunner of the Christ, what did that mean? The raving maniac in the desert. We each have to meet the person who can show us our own unconscious, our own desert, what we don't want to deal with. And that's, of course, exactly what John did with the king and the queen, and they took off his head, because there were two skills he had not developed, and that was the ability to, or know when to hold the mirror up and when to duck. So just be aware of the desire to correct and playing John the Baptist in that situation, because it can be touchy.
Appreciate that. I've been working these last few years on smiling a lot and just saying yes and not going much further in any of these scenarios. It works out a whole lot better.
Understood. There's an old saying that says you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But if you demonstrate a new principle, you can make him thirsty.
Yes, I'm in another rainstorm. Hope that noise isn't overbearing. I appreciate
You're good on
those,
the noise. We'll let you know if the noise is a problem. Let's go ahead with perception.
Okay. Say again?
Let's go ahead with your question about perception.
Okay. The collapse in perception is, want to ask, is that collapsing of the goals? Is that just another way of saying that?
No.
Okay. I'm glad I asked then. Please expound.
So let's lay a foundation so we've got anybody else listening that doesn't have the brain cells for this. I know you've got some of it, but to give a whole picture. So one of the foundation points of this work is some work that was done at Harvard University back in the 50s. And the gentleman there did research where he had electrodes hooked to people's heads and could measure brain cell firings. And what he found was that in a time frame where they could measure 10,000 units of electrical activity firing in the brain, the max amount of data that went into conscious awareness, perception, was 9 bits of data. In that same time frame, it's been estimated that we live in perhaps a 20 trillion bit world. For example's sake, not saying that it's literal, imagine if we're living in a 20 trillion bit world, we've got a reducing valve called the mind that brings it down to 10,000 bits, and then there's a mechanism that reduces it to 9 bits. The 9 bits that are most important for perceived purpose and survival. So the mind, in effect, becomes a reducing valve. That final reduction, if there are 10,000 brain cells firing and only 9 bits get into conscious awareness, build my perception, obviously something drives that process. What drives the process? It's easy to determine. Just notice that unless you're really just a miserable person, you're pretty happy with most everybody as long as they're fulfilling your goals. And you'll notice that the only time your mind counsels you to go into upset, pretending that someone else is the problem in your life, is when they violate a goal that you have for them. Now, when you put that all together, what you realize is that the driver for the reduction process from 10,000 brain cells firing to 9 brain bits of data firing, the controller of that reduction process, the driver for it, is our goals. So if I walk into a room, an example it comes to mind, this just pops up. Several years ago, we were in the Bahamas doing a workshop, an intensive, and a guy came who was at the intensive, had gone swimming, and had got caught in the undertow. And, I mean, he came back looking like he'd almost drowned. I mean, he was covered in seaweed, he was a mess, and he was just like almost drowned. And when later in the workshop, I ended up using that as an example of how goals change perception in identical circumstances. So, imagine that, cancel the thought, this fellow who was a friend of mine had actually drowned. What that would bring up for me would probably be pretty intense and certainly anything but happy, unless I had a different goal. My goal for this friend to be at the workshop was to do healing, to have a good time, to improve his life. They were my goals. But let's imagine that I were in another mindset, and my goal for getting him to come to the Bahamas was I wanted to have an affair with his wife, and I wanted him to die. And he gets caught in the riptide and dies. And dies. Different goal. Am I now upset over this person dying? No, I'm a pretty happy camper. My goal has been achieved. I get a hit of dopamine. People can become hooked into and addicted to destructive goals because when a goal is achieved, you get a hit of dopamine, and dopamine's been called happy powder. So perception, the 9 bits that the mind selects, is ferreted out, recruited, or chosen, or we could say in computer terms, driven by our goals. So I don't collapse the goal. My objective is to collapse the perception based in hostility or fear. The mechanism that Yeshua taught in the first century Aramaic language for doing that was to recognize that goals drive perception, and I cancel a goal. I ferret out and identify exactly what the goal is that I'm holding in this situation, and I cancel it. And since that goal is the driver for my mind constructing this particular perception, that perception collapses as a result of canceling the goal. Now, when perception collapses, remember when Yeshua, or in the scriptures, when they talk about take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. The word heart there in our modern updated language would be the unconscious. Take care of your unconscious. Watch what's going on in your life because it's a direct corollary to your own unconscious. Take care, forgive from your heart, your unconscious, that which you put into your brain's image of your brother, and you're freed of it. But if it's in your unconscious, how do you do that? You recognize that if you've projected something into your brain's image of another, and there's some form of upset, there's a goal that drives that whole process. When I cancel the goal, the perceptual construct of my mind collapses in on itself, into its own footprint. And now, if I'm really paying attention, when I cancel that goal, if I'm really watching rather than just letting my mind jump onto something else and avoid, if I really listen inside, the fact that that perceptual construct, of which I'm only seeing the tip of the iceberg of, the rest of it's hidden under the water, if I'm paying attention, I have a moment there that I can access my own unconscious dynamics. And if I have the super processor, in Aramaic, Ruka Kudsha, active in me, then I can process that unconscious dynamic. A good visual for that, although it's a pretty nasty picture, we all on 9/11 got to see those buildings do a free fall collapse into their own footprint. That would be like perception dropping into the unconscious. If I follow it down, if I'm watching, if I'm listening, if I'm paying attention, I'll start to get clues or perhaps direct knowledge of what's going on in my own unconscious. And when I choose to remove what's going in my own unconscious, then that dynamic's no longer in me to put into my brain's image of my brother. Does that make a difference for you on the difference between canceling and collapsing?
We're canceling the goals, which allows the perception to collapse.
Correct. The goal being the driver of the perception means that when I remove it, the perception's going to collapse in on its own footprint, and now I have access to the unconscious part of my mind that's beneath the surface of this perception. The other 9,991 bits out of the 10,000 brain cells firing.
Amazing. Thank you.
It took me 35 years to understand that one. 35 years working with Yeshua's first century Aramaic words. 35 years to understand that one piece of information.
That's powerful, and just when I think I'm getting it, I hear something like I did on the show, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, maybe how is this working? But I'm going to go back and listen to this, of course, several more times, and yeah, it'll be good to review it. Thank you.
Well, if you go back and hear Yeshua, he says, in order to utilize his work, you've got to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. He's saying you've got to have the brain cells. And each time you listen, each time you engage, you build the brain cells. And then the mind can finally produce a reality that matches actuality. Now the mind is now starting to serve its original true purpose, our footstool, rather than our controller.
Makes all the difference in love, doesn't it?
All the difference.
All the difference. Okay. Well, that's at least we still got. I'd like to switch back to the time we spent together back some months ago, and following through, and all the places and practitioners I've been. I've shared with you. It's just amazing list. I would like your thoughts on. I can't recall if I already talked to you about this on a phone call back a bit ago, but tongue tie, how that fits in with generational fears, and I supposedly am challenged with one that is just one step below a deep grade, maybe is a way to say it. And, you know, there's talk of surgery this and laser this, and just some thoughts that you might have around it and how this all fits in with the forgiveness process.
Tell me more about this diagnosis of tongue tie.
Tongue tie. My comprehension at this point is, besides this congenital rib situation I have, I apparently came out of the womb with this tongue tie and rib and not breathing properly, not even swallowing properly. And I recall reading some years ago what a powerful little creature our tongue is, and what a powerful muscle it is. It actually touches all the way down to our toes, if I'm comprehending all that correctly. So if the tongue is not in a released position, then the swallow is wrong. If the swallow is wrong, incorrect. The swallow is incorrect. if that's incorrect, we're using the wrong muscles in our neck, which affects our breathing down in our diaphragm and all of that. So all this connection piece, and that's where my comprehension is at the moment.
Right. So you're looking for some input on what might be the emotional characteristics that would result in that? What would that issue look like?
Yes, and from realizing, had an inkling of it even before I met you and started comprehending this work, but now it's clear that everything we're thinking is either a generational, everything we're experiencing in our physical body, disease, discomfort, what the case may be, is a result of our thinking and or what's in our generational DNA. So it's clear from people like Joe Dispenza that we can clear these things up with our mind in right thinking. And I don't see any exclusion for a tongue tie or rib displacement. Well, how do you see these things fitting into emotional and maybe past generational traumas, and how best to work on something like this?
Well, as with virtually any question that gets asked, my main answer is all of the above. Every tool you've got, and you work in every arena that you can work, and where there are physical, quote unquote, on the level where we think of things as physical, restrictions in motion with the tongue, which has all kinds of implications to it. Certainly, there's going to be, or my take would be, there's going to be a mental, emotional component to it, which would tend to look like, I'm not allowed to speak, or, I'm always being shut up or shut down. And that could easily be a generational pattern. And I know that tongue tie is something that tends to be or can be generational. It can run in families, and it's usually more males than females that have that challenge. And that has all kinds of implications, which I will not even start to bring up because I want to keep my head attached. Of course, I'm just kidding. Excuse me. Couldn't resist that. So, yes, I think that one can do, as Joe says, do their work and clean up any physiological process. And in a case like, if there is an identifiable muscular deformity that can be surgically corrected and it's creating problems, my thought would be, well, yeah, I might be able to take the next 10 minutes or the next 10 years and rectify this emotionally. My physiology will change. In the meantime, it's a simple procedure to be done in a doctor's office with a mild local anesthetic. So why wouldn't I do that if they were the choices? But I would, emotionally, mentally, I would suspect would be rooted in, I'm not allowed to talk, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, be power person type messages, keep your mouth shut, be seen and not heard, all of those kinds of messages. That kind of the information you're looking for?
That runs deep. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. And you answered my follow-up question also is there's a couple different procedures for something like this, but the one I'm liking most is a laser release. It's with a laser beam. Sounds like a little less intrusive, and like you say, if it can boost me along without too many dramatic takings, in other words, go for it, right?
That would be my thought. I mean, if it's identifiable and it's not a procedure with big side effects, if there are still mental, emotional issues to be worked through, having it done so that the symptoms are out of the way seems to make sense while you do your work around it.
Yes, I'm with you there. I'm going to give, of course, another opinion, and then amazingly there is work that is suggested that they won't even my understanding, more high caliber practitioners won't even do a release like this, especially in an adult, without myofascial therapies. So there's 5 to 6 preparational therapies before the procedure, and then about half a dozen after the procedure to strengthen the muscle in its new form, in other words.
Right. Well, it sounds like experts in that arena have done a significant amount of work in how to make the procedure, if it's undertaken, as successful as possible. So that certainly makes sense.
Yes, been speaking with them, and of course just found out about this, I don't know if it's been even a month, and remarkable how many dentists, doctor's office, high professionals been to, and just finding this out. So that's amazing to me, but grateful that if I do find out here first part of August it's confirmed again, I will move into doing some therapy and then seeing how that works, aiming toward the laser procedure and looking forward to breathing better, which will help everything, including the release of the emotional
Absolutely.
work, and physically, mentally, spiritually. It's got to just bring me to the next higher level. And again, I bring this all back to being together with you in early March, and just a whole different outlook, and that was the start of moving things in a much greater manner.
Well, I'm delighted after so many decades of searching that things are fitting in place and moving onward and upward.
Yes, my friends, it's really wonderful, and had a slight challenge with a headache yesterday, very slight, and maybe every 3 weeks, but certainly better than 3 times a week. And things are just remarkable, and it's making life so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. And is the level of the headache still minor compared to what it was before we worked?
Very minor. Very minor.
Awesome.
So
well, I look forward to the next. I look forward to the next quantum still point, and maybe we can eradicate that totally.
Yes, that and being able to breathe better through the still point sessions. It's got to take it right off the table. It'll be gone.
You have my support. 2,000%.
Really neat. I'll keep you posted. And when will your next iteration of the still point process come out? Is that something that we'll see soon, or is that you still working on it?
The description of it. Well, I've moved it from an explanation of to a roadmap, because I'm realizing, what for me literally took 50 years to bring together, I do fairly easily with someone because that's what I do. But as I've been describing it and interacting with yourself and a couple of the others that I've walked through or taken through the still point or the quantum still point process, I'm realizing that it really incorporates many phases of experience in my own personal process. So I'm expanding out on integrating that so that the whole roadmap is there, that one can understand what it is that we're doing and what it is we're going through. And, you know, collapsing something that, you know, in other circumstances takes decades to do to a matter of days. You know, one of the things that I actually was writing about this morning is realizing that, you know, the still point is really, in the world's, the way the world speaks about it, is really a deep state of meditation. And ultimately, you know, if you look into the mystics and the yogis and such, one of the objectives of that process was to get to a space of no mind. I actually had the blessing of having that happen, and I'm realizing as I'm working with people with the quantum still point how important that was in my own process. And I had the blessing of that experience 43 years ago when my daughter was born. And I caught her, and she opened her eyes and looked into my eyes while she was still delivering from her mother's womb, looked me square in the eye, focused 100%, which they say a newborn can't do, but she did, and grinned at me. And she put me into a state of no mind. And, you know, it's just, as I've been writing and going back through, how did I get here? How did I arrive here? That was one of the steps in the process. And for me, the objective, the thing that holds epigenetics in place is what in the scriptures was called the mind of man. And one of the objectives of the quantum still point is to get at least that long being out of your mind. What happens is the epigenetic program, to the degree that one is free of resistance, collapses. And that's one of the objectives of meditation. And people spend years to get to that deep state, which I found we can do in 3 to 5 days.
It was certainly a wonderful
So I'm still
experience.
writing. I'm actually I spent about 3 hours this morning on it. I've probably spent I don't know, 80 hours on it in the last few weeks. Just really getting it down to what is the core of this? What's really the root of it? So, yes, I will make sure you get a copy of it the next iteration of it.
Yes, it's a wonderful to review and read in my mind, and just looking forward to it, Michael.
Absolutely, sir. Holding you in a blessing, and travel safely.
Thank you much. Appreciate the time on the show today. Thank you, Jeannie, and we'll certainly be in touch these next weeks. As I'm away from my regular routine, I'll come back on.
All right. Take care. Blessings.
Take
Bye-bye.
good care, folks. Blessings.
All right. Everybody, thanks for joining us. Have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give.